Ladies and gentlemen, Robert Spencer.
I'm very glad to be here today to be able to, for probably the first time ever, bring you some good news. And that is that Hillary Clinton is running for President of the United States. And this is, of course, the best gift that the Republican Party has received in ages. But there is, of course, in a very serious way, the possibility that we have to entertain that she could really be the next president. And it is with that in mind that I think that it is important to recall today some of the aspects of her record that are very little discussed. We all know about Benghazi. We all know that the Obama administration now was apprised that it was an al-Qaeda attack from the beginning, and that they refused and ignored repeated calls for help and left the ambassador Chris Stevens and his colleagues to be killed. We know all that, but there's more. We know that the Obama administration immediately blamed a video about Muhammad, and that video then became the touchstone for riots and killings around the Islamic world, with innocent people being killed because of this video. What is less known is that that video itself had 17 views on YouTube at the time when the Obama administration attributed the attacks in Benghazi to it. And that nobody, in other words, had heard of it. Nobody knew that this video existed. Not only that, there are millions of things on YouTube, and many, many hundreds of thousands, I would guess, videos attacking various aspects of Islam, the Quran, Muhammad, many of which have many, many thousands and even millions of views. So what is it that happened that the Obama administration, and in particular the Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, fastened on this one video in order to attribute the attack on Chris Stevens and his colleagues to it? What it was, I think, the culmination of a years-long effort by Hillary Clinton and the Obama administration in general to acquiesce to a concerted campaign to curtail the freedom of speech. This is what I mean. The Organization of Islamic Cooperation is 57 Muslim governments around the world, 56 nations, and the Palestinian Authority. Since the collapse of the Soviet bloc, it is the largest voting bloc at the United Nations. And from 1999 to 2010, every year, they introduced a resolution at the UN calling for the criminalization of incitement to religious hatred. And this is where it becomes very difficult. Nobody's in favor of hatred. Nobody's in favor of mocking somebody's sacred beliefs and so on. But the fact is that in Islam, you may recall, as our president has told us, the future must not belong to those who slander the Prophet of Islam. This very important point about that is this. In Islamic law, slander is not telling lies about somebody. Slander is telling truths about somebody that they don't want known. That is as it is defined in Islamic law books. So, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation is trying to criminalize incitement to religious hatred. By that they mean honest investigations of the motives and goals of jihad terrorists. They want to foreclose on the possibility that counter-terror analysts can study what the jihadis believe and why they are doing what they're doing. Because they say that would be incitement to religious hatred. It will make people dislike Muslims. Because if you look into what the jihadis are doing, why they are doing it, what their stated motives and goals are, it all goes back to Islam and the Quran and Muhammad. So the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, in other words, has been trying year after year after year at the UN to make it a criminal offense and to compel Western states to make it a criminal offense to discuss openly what the jihadis believe and why they are doing what they're doing. Which would, of course, leave a free hand to the jihadis. They would be able to do whatever they wanted, unopposed, without us being able to say a word in opposition to them. and we would be transgressing against the first dictum of warfare, know your enemy. Year after year after year, they did this, and the Bush administration would vote against it, and that was the end of it. 2011, they changed the wording a little bit, softened it a little bit, but it was essentially the same thing. And Hillary Clinton and the Obama administration signed on to it. And not only that, but in December 2011, Ekmeladini Sanolu, the Secretary General of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, came to Washington and had a 3-day meeting with Hillary Clinton. It was closed door. Nobody knows what they talked about. Nobody knows what they did. But for 3 days they met. After this resolution had been passed at the UN, which was essentially a resolution in which the United States government, for the first time in history, went on record as opposing the United States Constitution. Because in saying that certain acts, certain speech, certain things people say ought to be criminalized, that's saying we're against the First Amendment. Then, fast forward back to Benghazi. 9 months after the closed-door meeting with Ekmeladini Sanolu, Hillary Clinton is at a White House reception for the survivors, the relatives of the people who were killed at Benghazi. And she went up to the father of one of the men who was killed, and she said, we're going to have that filmmaker arrested and prosecuted. And she did. And he was served a year in prison. Now, we all heard, and for all I know it may even be true, even though it was in the New York Times, that this filmmaker had a dodgy reputation and had a criminal record, and he was on probation. And one of the terms of his probation was he couldn't go on the internet. And so it was taken as a violation of his probation that the video was on YouTube. Now, of course, the obvious question is, well, maybe he got somebody else to put it up. Maybe he had nothing to do with going on the internet and putting it up, but this was never asked because it was inconvenient. He was put into jail for violation of probation. Now let me ask you this. If I went into certain areas of Los Angeles and walked down the street, how many violators of probation do you think I might pass by? And how many of them would be walking free even though they had violated probation in a far more serious manner than putting a video on YouTube? And yet this one was singled out and put in prison after Hillary Clinton said that was exactly what was going to happen. He became the first political prisoner in the United States history. He was in prison, make no mistake, he was in prison not for his probation violation. He was in prison because he transgressed against Islamic law, because he disliked Islam and Muhammad. He was in prison, in other words, for his opinions, which makes him a political prisoner. In the United States, it is illegal to have political prisoners. The First Amendment makes it impossible, or it should be impossible, unless you have a political leader as unscrupulous as Hillary Clinton and a media as dishonest as the mainstream media is today. But the fact is that in the United States, it is not illegal to dislike Islam, the Quran, and Muhammad. It is not illegal to dislike Christianity. It is not illegal to dislike any belief system that you want. It is not illegal to say that some system of ideas is bad for people and I oppose it. And people have done that throughout history. The reason why, as a matter of fact, that is legal in the United States is because the founding fathers knew that the king and the political establishment in Britain would rule their own opinions out of the realm of acceptable discourse and imprison them for their opinions. And that the freedom of speech was therefore the foundation of a free society that had to be among the first in the Bill of Rights because it was the cornerstone of all our other freedoms. Now, Hillary Clinton had the filmmaker arrested and prosecuted. It's not illegal in American law to have opinions that are unacceptable to the political elites, but it is illegal in Islamic law, as the Organization of Islamic Cooperation has been pursuing all these years. It is illegal in Islamic law for non-Muslims to criticize Islam, to denigrate Muhammad, to say that the Quran is a farrago. Any of these things are outside the bounds of what is acceptable and are indeed death penalty offenses. So you could at least, I suppose, praise Hillary for her moderation and that she didn't have the filmmaker killed. But the fact is that in imprisoning him and in saying that she was going to do so as a direct result of his producing a video that was critical of Muhammad, she was adhering to Islamic law regarding blasphemy, adhering to the program of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, which she had already had the U.S. sign on to at the UN, and which she obviously endorsed in these closed-door meetings with the Secretary General of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. So what we have in Hillary Clinton as a candidate for President of the United States is an extension of Barack Obama's statement, which I think has to be emblazoned on, it ought to be emblazoned on every bumper sticker in every Republican candidacy in every state in the Union. The future must not belong to those who slander the Prophet of Islam. As a matter of fact, the future must belong to those who slander the Prophet of Islam. It must belong It must belong not, in other words, to those who are spreading lies or hatred in any legitimate sense, but those who are telling unwelcome truths. Unwelcome truths that are unacceptable to the political and media elites. We're getting to a point where it is very dangerous nowadays to say certain things. And this is something that never should have happened in the United States of America. Hillary Clinton also said, in the wake of the U.S. accepting that resolution at the UN, Resolution 1618, she said that, of course, well, we have the First Amendment, but we should resort to good old-fashioned public shaming of those who speak hatred. Now look, you know, when I first started doing this publicly, I was taken aback. I mean, I was talking about the motives and goals of the terrorists, and then Council on American Islamic Relations or these other groups would say, you're spreading hatred. And it's only now, years later, that I realized that this was a very clever tactic because it coincides perfectly with this. They've been saying that I spread hatred for years. They got the British government to believe it. And they tar anybody and everybody who speaks honestly about the jihad threat with the same label. And the thing is that then when you have these pushes to criminalize hate speech, then you see where this is going. And it suits exactly the same agenda of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, which would leave us mute and defenseless in the face of the advancing jihad. And so, Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama are demonstrably enemies of the First Amendment and the Constitution of the United States. And the thing is that I think people don't realize the gravity of this. That I have said this to people before. I was speaking with a lawyer once, and he said, you don't have to worry about this. There is no possibility that the freedom of speech can be infringed in the United States. We have the First Amendment. Well, have you ever seen the First Amendment stand up and defend itself? Have you ever seen the First Amendment step up to the podium and explain to you why it was important and needed to be defended? The First Amendment is not going to do anything unless people are willing to stand up and defend it. The Second Amendment has been hedged all around, so much so that it is essentially a dead letter in many areas of the country. Try getting a handgun for your own self-defense in New York City and then come back and tell me that isn't so. Same thing could happen to the First Amendment, and it's already happening. What Hillary Clinton was saying when she said, we need to subject these people to good old-fashioned public shaming, it's happening. I mean, I'm glad that Paul mentioned the ban actually in Britain because it's a primary example of that. That if you speak out about jihad terror in an honest fashion, then you will be stigmatized, denounced, marginalized, and then used to do the same thing to other people. So you see, you know, I will never appear on CNN or MSNBC because this has all been done to me. Now, this is not personal, and I'm not really waiting by the phone to hear from them. But this is an example of how this works. Last month, I spoke at a Young America's Foundation conference, and it was right after Ted Cruz had declared that he was a candidate for president, and he was also speaking there. Mother Jones, the leftist rag, and Media Matters, and the Council on American Islamic Relations, and some others began to publish these articles saying Cruz is speaking with the hate-mongering bigot Spencer, and Cruz has to cancel to show his goodwill. And you see, now, because Cruz didn't cancel, to his credit, they can say, well, you see, Cruz has all these dodgy associations. If they were to succeed in destroying Cruz, then whoever Cruz is standing next to, they can say, well, you know, he was with Ted Cruz. And what's wrong with Cruz? Well, he has all these very, very unsavory associations. And you see, it's just one after the other. This is the Saul Alinsky tactic. You pick up a target, you smear, demonize, marginalize it, freeze it out, then it's out of the way, and then you do it to the next guy, and you use your last success to do it to the next one. Hillary Clinton, good old-fashioned public shaming. This is what we have in the public discourse today. And this is what millions of people will be voting for when they vote for Hillary Clinton for President of the United States, voting for more of the same. What I hope that will happen is that there will be an alternative. Now, Ted Cruz, to his credit, did not bow to the pressure and did not cancel from speaking with me. But there are many, many other instances. Like I say, this happens to everyone and anyone who speaks out about these issues. And the Republican Party, to a tremendous degree, has accepted this and acquiesced to it. And so you have the spectacle of John McCain going over to Syria and posing for pictures with these jihadis and coming back and saying that they're moderates, because everybody has to find moderate Muslims. Everybody's avid to find moderate Muslims and say, see, these people are the ones we can trust and everything's okay. The thing is that there certainly are moderate Muslims. In other words, Muslims who are not interested in beheading us or in asserting political supremacy and hegemony and destroying the American system and imposing Islamic law. There are millions of such Muslims. The thing is that there were millions of Germans who were not Nazis. There were millions of Russians who were not Soviet communists. But they did not do anything, and for many reasons they were not able to do anything to stand up against the people who were the organized and energized vanguard. And that's what we have today. The Republican Party needs to understand that this whole thing has been a tremendously successful propaganda initiative from the beginning, going on for years now. And that to speak honestly about the jihad threat, to say there are teachings within Islam of warfare and subjugation and hegemony, this is not bigotry or hatred, this is just the truth. These things are demonstrable from the Quran. I'll give you an example. I was talking earlier to Dr. Wiener, and we were talking about the Mufti of Egypt. Did any of you see the Wall Street Journal and the Mufti of Egypt saying the terrorists have nothing to do with Islam? And this is, of course, the Obama line, right? It's the ISIS has nothing to do with Islam. All the terrorists have nothing to do with Islam. And the Grand Mufti of Egypt, Shawki Alam, he published a piece in the Wall Street Journal last week where he was saying exactly that and quoting the Quran and showing us that the terrorists have nothing to do with Islam. Now, I'm telling you this because this is an example of the kind of thing that's done and the kind of thing that rules the day in the public discourse today. The Mufti of Egypt, in his piece, he quoted chapter 5, verse 32 of the Quran, which is every president and every prime minister and every Western leader's favorite verse of the Quran. And it says, "He who saves a life shall be as if he had given life to all mankind, and he who slays a soul shall be as if he had slain all mankind." But I only read part of it. It sounds nice, doesn't it? You kill one person, it's as if you've killed all mankind. You save one person, it's as if you've saved all mankind. And the Mufti quoted it like that and gave us the impression, he actually said this straight out, that see, this killing is not allowed. No violence is not allowed in Islam. There's nothing to do with Islam. Great. The thing is, there's more. This is actually a passage that is taken from the Talmud. It's one of the Jewish influences on the Quran. There are many things in the Quran that are taken from Judaism and Christianity and Zoroastrianism. And this one comes from the Talmud. And that part about saving one person is like saving all mankind, and killing one person is like killing all mankind, that's the part from the Talmud. But this is actually how it goes in the Quran. Therefore, we ordained for the children of Israel. So in the first place, note, this is not a universal command to all people. Allah is saying in the Quran, this is something He told the children of Israel only. So in the first place, it's restricted. It's not for the Muslims. We ordained for the children of Israel that he who kills a soul, unless it be for murder or spreading mischief on earth, shall be as if he had slain all mankind. Now, stay with me here. He who slays a soul, unless it be for murder or spreading mischief on earth, shall be as if he had slain all mankind. And he who saves a life shall be as if he had given life to all mankind. Okay, this is what Allah told the children of Israel. And then it goes on. Indeed, again and again did our messengers come to them with clear directives, yet many of them continued to commit excesses on earth. So the whole passage, and we're not even finished yet, the whole passage as I have read to you so far, it's actually saying, Allah is saying, we told the Jews not to kill innocent people, and yet they still continue to commit excesses on earth. So this is actually a passage about how terrible the Jews are, of which there are many in the Quran. Then there's more. Those who wage war against Allah and His messenger and go about on the earth spreading mischief. Now, did you hear that? Go about on the earth spreading mischief? In the part about killing all mankind, it says, he who slays a soul unless it be for murder or spreading mischief on earth. Mischief is fitna in Arabic. It's a very important concept in Islam. It's causing trouble, essentially, making a disturbance in some way that is against Islam, and it'll get you killed. And so it's the first part saying, we told the Jews that anybody who kills somebody, unless he's spreading fitna, is like you've killed all of mankind. And they still did it. And so therefore, those who wage war against Allah and His messenger and go about on earth spreading mischief, fitna, what happens to them? Their recompense is that they either be killed or crucified or have their hands and feet cut off on opposite sides. How peaceful. So you see, the whole point is, the whole passage is saying, I told the Jews this, they didn't do it, and so they should be killed or crucified or have their hands and feet cut off on opposite sides. The Mufti only quoted the good parts that made it seem as if there's peace taught in Islam and the terrorists are transgressing. Now what is that? Is that reform? Is that a new vision of Islam that's compatible with humane values and the human rights and the dignity of every human person? Unfortunately not. That is deception, which is also an Islamic concept of deceiving unbelievers into complacency, because a complacent enemy is easier to beat than one that is informed and resolute. When Barack Obama says the Islamic State is not Islamic, and Hillary Clinton arrests and prosecutes somebody for criticizing Islam, and they are doing this in cooperation with an organized group, a multinational group, a Muslim group that is determined to destroy the freedom of speech in the United States. And when these patently deceptive presentations are it's not just the Mufti, practically every day I see another article coming down. You can be sure CNN, NBC, MSNBC, all of them, whenever they have a piece about is Islam responsible for terrorism, you can be sure the answer is no. Does Islam teach anything that's violent? Oh, no, no, no. When we see all these things, they are all in service, all going in one direction. And that one direction is to make it impossible. It's either too much of a stigma that people don't want to bear. They're afraid to be called bigots and racists and hate mongers and not get invited to the good parties and excoriated everywhere and banned from Britain. Or it will be an absolute criminal offense to say these things, which is what the OIC ultimately wants. And we're already on the way. With hate crimes, we already have hate crimes now in the United States. What's the difference between a crime and a hate crime? Well, if I come up and knock you down and take your money, that's a crime. But if I come and knock you down and take your money and call you a dirty Californian, that's a hate crime, because I hate Californians. So in other words, the difference between a crime and a hate crime is speech. And so we already have hate speech in the United States. And when the OIC and CARE and all these groups in the United States are saying that it is an act of hate to speak honestly about the Islamic Jihad agenda, that's very insidious. It is an ultimately an attempt to make it impossible for us to resist jihad terror. And it works. It works very well. There was a few years back, there was a plot at Fort Dix. There were a group of Muslims, and they were incidentally Albanians, so they were white guys. This is important for the story. Stay with me. They were going to go into Fort Dix and shoot as many American soldiers as possible before they themselves were killed, and then they get the 72 virgins. Their plot was foiled. And their plot was foiled by a young man named Brian Morgenstern who worked in a video store near Fort Dix. And as it happened, these jihadis, they loved blood and gore. They loved death, as the jihadis often boast about doing. They loved death and destruction. And so they liked to watch beheading videos and things blowing up and such, but they had them on VHS tapes. So they took them to the video store and they said to this kid, Brian, they said, "Can you please transfer these to DVD?" And he said, okay. And he's doing his job, and he's seeing it all go by, and he starts to get alarmed. And so he went to his manager, and he said, "Dude, I'm seeing some really weird stuff on these videos. It's like freaking me out. Should I go to the police, or would that be racist?" Now remember, he had seen the guys. They'd come into the store, and he saw that they were white guys, Albanians, but he still got it internalized. It's part of his thinking. He knows it. He grew up with it. He breathed it in, that it's racist to resist jihad terror. It's racist to try to stop somebody from killing people in the name of Allah. Now, luckily, he decided to be racist. And he went to the police, and and the plot was foiled, and those guys are in jail now. And so we can thank him for that. But the fact that it was a close call, I think, is very telling about where we are as a society. And it's a testimony to the extraordinary success of this ongoing concerted campaign to make it impossible to speak about these issues in any honest fashion. And of course, the stakes couldn't be higher. It's a matter of life and death. Just yesterday, the Islamic State issued new videos boasting about how they were going to be striking in the United States. It would be bigger than 9/11. And, you know, I think that we should pay careful attention to that and take that seriously. There was recently a young man, Rahil Mahrous Ubaida. His real name is Christopher Lee Cornell. And he became a Muslim and insists now on being called Rahil Mahrous Ubaida. And you can see why he would want to. And anyway, he was arrested recently for his involvement in a jihad plot. And he said, he was in Columbus, Ohio, and he said, "We're in Ohio, we're in every state, and we're far more organized than you think." Now, maybe it was an empty boast, but the fact is we see young Muslims all around the world going to join the Islamic State. We never saw this before with Al-Qaeda, with Boko Haram, with Ash-Shabaab, with any of the other jihad groups. We never saw it. 25,000 Muslims now from around the world have joined the Islamic State, either in Iraq or Syria or in Libya. The Islamic State has gained the allegiance of jihadis in the Philippines, in Nigeria, in Afghanistan, elsewhere in Sinai, all over the world, because they claim to reconstitute the caliphate, which is, in Islamic theology, the sole government to which any Muslim really owes obedience. And this claim obviously resonates. It resonates with young Muslims in Ohio, like Rahil Mahrous Ubaida. Chris. It resonates with all the thousands of Muslims who've gone to join the Islamic State and the many more who want to. It resonates with the Muslims we see practically every day. If you read Jihad Watch, jihadwatch.org on your website, on the web. If you read these things, you will see. Every day, practically, we see another Muslim arrested for another jihad plot, pledging allegiance to the Islamic State. All over the place. It's clearly resonating, the Islamic State's message, with young Muslims around the world. At a time when all of the Western elites, all of the Western intelligentsia, all the media are saying it has nothing to do with Islam. This is a dangerous and suicidal path. And we have to stand up now and say enough. And any presidential candidate that we back, and any candidate on the local, state, national level, we have to insist from them that they will no longer engage in these politically correct, willful deceptions and willful ignorance about this problem, but will speak about it honestly and deal with it in a fashion that will actually do something to neutralize it. The stakes are very high and the time is very short. And so I would exhort all of you, if you have any contacts with political candidates, with political officials, that you begin to bring this message to them and to insist on them the whole truth and nothing but the truth. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you, Robert. You mentioned the Wall Street Journal article. Her son, Ali, had a full-page article in the Wall Street Journal touting her new book and calling for a reformation in Islam. Coincidentally, the president of Egypt has called for a revolution in Islam. And her son Ali, in her article, talked about 5 discrete steps that were necessary for the believers to adopt. Now, given what you've said about the difficulty, what do you think of the probability or the possibility and probability of any step at revolution in Islam to bring it more in conformance with Western societal beliefs?
I would never say that something is impossible. History is full of surprises and things that people never expected. And it may be that the pressure upon Islam, did you see Rocky II? You remember the one, the rematch, where they both fall to the ground and then they're both being counted out and the one who's going to win is the one who can get up in time? That's kind of like the situation that we're in now. The Western world is in desperate straits, but so is the Islamic world. And it may be that the pressures upon the Islamic world will be so great that reform will become something that's a viable possibility. But at this point, it is not. And with all respect to Hirsi Ali, whom I admire greatly, and to As-Sisi, the president of Egypt, the possibilities of these things that Hirsi Ali enumerated being implemented are exactly zero. The fact is that when you have a religion in which it is taught that it is a perfect religion, and it is taught this in an explicit fashion, that it's in the Quran, in the Islamic traditions. This day I have perfected your religion for you, Allah says to Muhammad. It's perfect, so you can't reform what's perfect. And there has never been reform in Islam except to go back to the basics, which is what reformers always do, right? They go back to the originals. And so there was a reform movement in Islam where they went back to what the Quran said and what the Hadith said, which is what As-Sisi said to do. Now I know As-Sisi had to tread very delicately because he's in Egypt. And the situation there is that he cannot afford to antagonize Muslims. He'll be driven from power immediately. But the fact is, he says, we'll go back to the original Quran and Hadith. That was done. Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab did that. You ever heard of the Wahhabis? Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab died in 1792, and his whole program was getting back to the basics, back to the Quran, back to the Hadith, and he created a form of Islam that's more violent and virulent and unyielding than the rest, because that's what's in the Quran and the Hadiths. So, you know, I wish them well, and I hope that there will be reform. I do not see it on the horizon at this point. Well, if you're talking about, the question was, shouldn't the word be revolution instead of reform? If you're talking about something that would really change, change Islam, it would be revolution. It would be a rejection of Quranic literalism, a rejection of any understanding of the Quran or the example of Muhammad as being something that should be literally followed. And that would require a revolution, yes. My great friend, the late Tashbi Sayyid, who some of you may have known, he was honest about that. He was a secular Muslim, and he said we have to reevaluate Muhammad as an example and reevaluate the Quran as being something that should be taken literally at all times. And he was a real reformer. Not these people who say that there's no problem and they lie to you about what's actually in the book, like the Mufti.
Right here.
Anyway, yes, there's a microphone going around. Yes, sir.
Robert, a two-part question, please. One, you mentioned all these Islamic groups in all these different countries. Do you think ISIS is here to stay long-term? And the second part is, why do you think Obama only speaks of ISIL and never of ISIS?
Well, you know, in point of fact, the name of the group that they use is the Islamic State. That's their name. On June 29th, 2014, they declared themselves to be the new caliphate, and they dropped the second half of their name, and that was of Iraq and Shams. Shams is the Levant, which is the Mediterranean area of the Middle East, Syria, Israel, Jordan, etc. And they dropped it. So really the name of the group, if you want to call them by what they call themselves, which I'm all for, is the Islamic State. It's neither ISIS nor ISIL. But why the president, when everybody else in the world is calling them ISIS, is calling them ISIL? The only thing I can guess is that he is subtly emphasizing that Israel is included in their purview, because the Syria, see, a lot of times the S in ISIS is translated as Syria, which is wrong. The word is Shams, which is Syria, but it's also Israel and Lebanon and Jordan. And so when he says the L, he's emphasizing that.
Right here, Robert.
Yes, sir.
God bless you, my friend.
Thank you, you too.
I just wanted to find out, because you know so much more about Islam than I do. I view Islam not at all as a legitimate religion. I see it as a criminalized sociopathy since its inception. Could you set me right as why it should be viewed as a legitimate, real religion?
Well, I guess it depends on what your definition of a legitimate religion is. I guess I should say that as if I was Bill Clinton. It all depends on what your definition of legitimized religion. Because, see, a religion purports to relate human beings to the divine. Islam does purport to relate human beings to the divine. So by that definition, it's a religion. Is it also an organized sociopathy? Yeah, sure. Sociopathy, absolutely. Is it a religion that teaches violence and subjugation and hatred? Absolutely. The Quran is very clear about that. Muhammad is the apostle of Allah. Those who follow him are merciful to one another, but ruthless to the unbelievers. You can look it up in your Qurans. Open them to chapter 48, verse 29, you'll see it. But anyway, that's an organized sociopathy, especially when you have the command to make war against those unbelievers, which you do have in the Quran. But it's also a religion. It's both and, not either or. Yes, sir.
Right here,
Oh, sorry, I thought you had it. I actually forgot it existed. Yes, there's the microphone.
More questions here, up the lady in red, and then at this Gary.
No, the lady in black.
The lady in red.
Okay,
The lady in black.
All right, lady.
I'll be meeting her later.
Hello.
Yes.
I was wondering what you thought in the wake of Charlie Hebdo, the future was for London and the UK and Europe.
Well, do you remember, actually, this is the day to reference Rocky. Do you remember Rocky 3, where Mr. T is playing the mean, nasty, aggressive boxer, and they say, "What's your prediction for the fight?" And he says, "My prediction? Pain." That's what I think is the future for England and Europe in general, is pain. In all seriousness, the situation is very dire there. They are in an aggressive appeasement mode. The Cameron government is doing everything it can. I mean, you know, Paul mentioned that they let in Sheikh Mohammed al-Arifi when they banned Pamela Geller and me, and that he was in favor of violent jihad. But apparently that's not something that is not conducive to the public good. Apparently, you know, I was actually banned. Interestingly enough, the Home Office, they sent me this letter. And it was kind of exciting to get a letter from the Home Office until I read it. But it said, "You're being banned from the country because you said Islam has a doctrine of warfare and subjugation of unbelievers." Jeez. And I thought, that's like being banned for saying that the sky is blue.
It is.
That's like being banned for saying automobiles run on gasoline.
It is.
So, petrol. And so, the idea that I would be banned for saying that, but al-Arifi would be let in for saying jihad is tearing the infidels limb from limb and smashing skulls. It's clear the British government, under the Tories, is okay with you saying that Islam has a doctrine of violence as long as you're for it. As long as you want the violence to happen. If you're against it, then you're not allowed in. Now that's a very, very dangerous situation because, of course, they're going to lose now to Labour, and Labour's even worse. And so the UK is bringing in all these jihadis. They are bending over backwards to appease them. How is this going to work out? Their birth rates are far lower than those of the Muslims, and they're already aggressive Muslim groups saying they're going to take over. Where do they think they're going to be in 20 years? And it's the same thing. It's not that I think that Britain is finished necessarily, or that Europe is either, but I don't see any way out of this at this point without violence. That there are going to be some British people who will say, no, I'm not going to live in a Sharia Britain, and they will fight. And then Muslims will fight them, and there will be civil war. I hope I'm wrong about that, but I don't see any way to avoid it at this point, given the fact that there is no government, no politician, no party that is standing up and saying we're going to confront this issue head on, not even UKIP. Yes, ma'am.
Hi. First of all, thank you so much. I hope you're speaking at a lot of colleges and universities because I think kids will relate to your humor, and it really is needed. But my question
Usually
to you,
I'm happy if they don't throw anything.
that's okay too, as long as they're there. But since I am somewhat of an activist, have you given this same talk broader to members of Congress? And if you have they forgotten? And should you do it again, perhaps, and really...
I'll speak to members of Congress anytime they call me, but here again, I ain't waiting by the phone. I have never given this talk to members of Congress. Actually, I've never spoken to members of Congress.
So is that something that could be sponsored, perhaps?
If anybody wanted to do it, but see, this is what happens, see. I am on the list. I'm a hate group according to the Southern Poverty Law Center. And I know I've been putting on weight, but to call me a group is... Anyway, the thing is, that is taken seriously. You know, people, the Southern Poverty Law Center, we all know it's a hate group itself, a far left group devoted to stigmatizing and ruling out of the political discourse any political views other than its own. And yet you read, you know, when the thing happened with Cruz and me, and I'm reading all these articles in AP and Reuters, and they're saying Cruz is going to speak with this far-right extremist bigot. The Southern Poverty Law Center says he's a hate group. And Council on American Islamic Relations, which is always quoted in mainstream media but never identified as being a supporter of Hamas, being linked to Hamas, having various of its officials arrested and convicted for jihad terror offenses. They never mention that, but they say, this Council on American Islamic Relations says Spencer's an extremist. Well, I think the Hamas group is an extremist, but the fact is that they own the mainstream. And so, see, a congressman is not going to meet me publicly, because then CARE will make a fuss, and Media Matters will make a fuss, and it'll be this blot on the congressman's record. And this is why they do what they do, see? And it works.
Robert, here.
Oh, hello. Voice from on high.
Hi. What I'm taking away from this is that America and Western societies are going to be in an endless war or conflict with Islam, unless you see some other outcome.
No, I think you're right. I think that as long as people believe the Quran is the word of God, and as long as people believe Muhammad is his prophet, they will think that it's part of their responsibility before God to wage war against and kill unbelievers and subjugate those they don't kill. This is Islamic doctrine. This is not something that just a tiny minority of extremists hold to. Every place that Muslims have gone in the world, there has been conflict between Muslims and non-Muslims, and attempts by Muslims to impose Islamic law. Every last place in history. Why does the United States think it's going to be different? Think it's going to be exempt from this? Oh, because we'll give them jobs. Can you imagine? Can you imagine? See, I think it's sort of strange how, maybe not so strange, how the left seems to have no understanding that human beings have a soul. And that the soul longs to be involved in something that matters, and not just watch movies, and eat popcorn all day. And so it's astonishing to me that they think that these jihadis who think they're wrong, but they think that they're doing a noble work for God. They think they're doing a grand, extraordinary spiritual and material effort that is the greatest thing you can do on this earth, and that they'll give it up to be a greeter at Walmart. Or to say, you want fries with that? They don't understand that these people would find that to be incommensurate with the dignity that they have found being jihadis. But that just doesn't mean anything, I guess, to aggressive secularists. So anyway, yes, I think that it is a conflict that will exist as long as Islam exists, and I don't see Islam going anywhere. And that the only thing we can do is be strong, not just militarily, but culturally, spiritually, societally, standing up for our own values and defending them. Imagine how different the world would be today if we had gone into Iraq and Afghanistan and said, instead of installing Sharia, Islamic law, in constitutions in both countries, which is what we did, instead of doing that, if we had said, okay, now we are here and we have these bases. Anybody who wants to leave Islam, come and we will give you safe harbor, because Islam has a death penalty for those who leave Islam. Women who are beaten and want a safe place, come and we'll protect you. People who speak out and they say things that are considered to be blasphemous or whatever, will give you protection. Do you think anybody would have come? And do you think that we might have been able to build a real, good, solid base of support among Muslims who don't want to live under Islamic law but don't have any place to go? But we didn't do that. We lost the opportunity. You know, in India, remember that famous old story about when the British Raj was at its height? They had this cultural confidence I'm speaking about. The British Raj had taken over India, and the Hindus were performing sati, the practice of having the wife of the man who had just died throw herself onto the funeral pyre of her husband. And the British outlawed it. And a Hindu delegation went to the British and said, well, you know, that's our culture. And the British authority in charge, he said, oh, you have your culture. Well, very well. We have to respect your culture. But we have our own culture. So you go ahead and perform sati, because that's your culture. And then we will live by our culture, which is anybody who performs sati, we will hang by the neck until dead. You have your culture and we have ours. And so sati ended. This is the kind of cultural confidence we should have had coming into Iraq and Afghanistan. In Japan, Douglas MacArthur, with the occupying force in 1945 to 53, he mandated that Shinto, the religious ideology that had given rise to the war, would have no place in the schools or in the political system. It was decreed. What if we had gone into Iraq and Afghanistan and said, no Islamists, nobody who is a supporter of Sharia, nobody who believes in political Islam, will have no place in the schools or in the government. Well, maybe they wouldn't have had anybody in the government. But I think it would have been far more in keeping with our own principles as a nation to have done that than to have done what we did and installed Islamic law. Yes, ma'am. The lady in red.
Yes.
Hello.
My fear, and I'm certain I'm not alone, is that at some point the beliefs of the Iranians and ISIL will couple. God forbid.
Couple?
In other words, work together. But my real question is, how important is the belief that the former ambassador of Iran said that they await the reappearance of the 12th Imam, but it will only happen after great disasters?
This is very important.
Is it important to the general Muslim jihadists, that belief?
No. I'll explain everything. In the first place, will the Islamic State and Iran join forces? That's unlikely because they hate each other. It's possible because there's an old saying in Arabic that translates to, my brother against my brother, but both of us against our cousin. And that could happen, but it's very unlikely because you've got the Sunni-Shiite divide there, which is 1,400 years old. They hate each other. They don't generally make common cause. And the Islamic State is directly threatening the Shiite client state in Baghdad that the Iranians want to keep. the Iraqi state, the Iraqi government that we installed there. And so I don't see that happening in the foreseeable future, at least. As far as the 12th Imam goes, in Shiite Islam is only 10 to 15% of Muslims worldwide. And in Shiite Islam, the successor of Muhammad as the leader of the Islamic community has to be a member of his household. And so it was a hereditary office, like a king. And the last Imam, the 12th, 12er Shi'ism is the official religion of the Islamic Republic of Iran. In the year 874, he was 5 years old, but he was the Imam because it was hereditary. He fell down a well and died. But there were some people around him who did not want to give up power. And so they started to claim, and they succeeded, that he was actually still alive and he had gone into occultation, into hiding, and that he was giving them messages. And he's still down there in the well. Mahmoud Ahmadinejad actually had a superhighway built between the well in Qom and Tehran so that he could go talk to the 12th Imam in the well, and that when the 12th Imam comes out, he can get right to Tehran and they can get down to business. So they take this very seriously. But the story is that, yes, at a time when the Muslims are persecuted more fiercely than they've ever been before, then the 12th Imam will come out of the well. And then he will conquer and Islamize the world and kill all the enemies of Islam, which is us. The thing about that is that there have been mullahs in Iran who have said that they could trigger that happening by triggering the persecution, say nuking Tel Aviv and then receiving retaliatory nuclear fire that would kill 10 to 15 million Iranians, which would mean the Muslims are persecuted more fiercely than they've ever been before, and then the 12th Imam will come back. And so it's a very, very dangerous idea because you remember mutually assured destruction with the Soviet Union? Neither of us wanted to die, and so we didn't kill each other. And with these people, that doesn't work because they want to die. And so it's very difficult to deal with. But we know that ultimately life does conquer death, and we are standing on the side of life, and so we will ultimately prevail in this. But as far as the thing goes with the Shiites, most Muslims don't believe that. 85 to 90% of the Muslims are Sunnis, and they don't buy any of that. But still, the Iranians might act upon it.
Right here.
Okay, last one.
No, Pat. I told Pat.
2 more? I'll try to be briefer in my answers.
And then Pat, and we're done.
Well, I'd like to know, I heard exactly what you said, especially now, but I have a question. You heard of Dr. Wilhelm Reich?
Oh, yes. I've heard of him.
Reich. He was a disciple of Freud, and he wrote a book called The Mass Psychology of Fascism. And mass psychology means not only fascism, there's a fascism in every, like there's religions that are tolerant, like Christian or Jewish or Buddhist, it's okay. But there are some religions that are intolerant, totalitarian, and in that case, what happened with Hitler, what happened with Mussolini, what happened with the Japan, Tojo in Japan, is the complete annihilation of those people who are intolerant and dictatorial. So what do you have to say about that?
Well, you're talking about an authoritarian, dictatorial religious system? Absolutely, that's exactly what we have. And it is, there are many, many resonances with fascism that it does share, yes. As far as complete annihilation, I would be all for the annihilation of the belief system. But even that is very difficult. And when it comes to human beings, obviously I'm in favor of the universal dignity of all people and human rights and so on. So I hope we would be able to find some way to fight this that would not involve killing people. Now, maybe that's completely unrealistic, but, there are wars, and wars will come, and wars will go, and so if it may be that this will come to a war that is strictly a war between Muslims and non-Muslims. I mean, this could happen because the Muslims are waging war in the name of Islam and saying that they are fighting because of Islam, and the West is busy saying, no, this has nothing to do with Islam, and bringing more Muslims in. Ultimately, there's going to be conflict about this, and either the Muslims are going to have to stop saying that they're at war with the West, or the West will surrender, or the West will fight. And if it comes to that, I hope it doesn't, then I hope that we will prevail. And actually, I'm confident that we will, because, as I say, life always ultimately wins out over death. And those who say they love death, when they say, we will defeat you because we love death more than you love life, they will never defeat us on that basis. Life will always prevail. And maybe that's an eschatological hope or airy mysticism, but I do believe it very strongly, and I think that the history of human history in general, and the history of warfare, bears out that states that were authoritarian, totalitarian, and life-destroying generally did not prevail in the long run.
Last question.
Last question, Mr. Boone, thank you for being here.
Thank you. Just a quick positive remark about what you just said, and then a question, and that is that light is greater than darkness. Darkness cannot exist with light. And if we continue to speak up as you are and as others are, and we continue to spread the light of truth, then the darkness will be exposed. And I believe we can win. It is love, it is life, but it is light, which is truth.
Absolutely.
And so we've got to keep proclaiming the truth, even though it's illegal in the Quran. But and because it's illegal, and now I just wanted to ask you a question: should we attach any significance to the fact that President Obama's closest advisor, as he has said many times, and Hillary Clinton's closest advisor are both Iranian?
Hillary Clinton's closest advisor actually is Saudi. If you're talking about Huma Abedin.
Yeah, that Wiener's
Yes.
wife, the other Wiener, the bad Wiener.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mike's cousin.
Yeah.
Anyway, Huma Abedin is Saudi. Valerie Jarrett is Iranian. And I do think that there is something to that. I mean, obviously, we may never know, ultimately. But there's no doubt that the president has pursued simultaneously foreign policy that is in line with doing everything that the Saudis want and everything the Iranians want. Now, these two things are very curious because they're on a collision course. Ultimately, the Saudis and Iranians are rivals because of the Sunni-Shiite divide. They're not friends. And so I don't know how that's all going to resolve, but I think that it's unmistakable that the president has pursued those policies, and then you look at these advisors, and you got to think, well, maybe they've been giving advice, and it's been heeded. Everything that the president has done has been in line with the Islamic agenda. And people say, well, he killed bin Laden, he killed al-Awlaki. Well, in the first place, those things were in motion before he became president. And second, it's very clear that he is against violent jihad, but he's done everything he could to aid and abet the goal of the jihadis, which was the implementation of Islamic law in every place where it could be implemented. So he is more of the Muslim Brotherhood type, which wants to implement the Islamic law by peaceful means, winning elections and so on. And then with the Iranians, he's been appeasing and appeasing and appeasing and acquiescing to this disastrous deal that, as Benjamin Netanyahu has so articulately and eloquently stated, and there's a statesman, if only he could run for president in 16. And so in other words, I think the record is very clear. It cannot be directly attributed to these advisors because, well, the nature of an advisor is he doesn't get credit for what he advises if it's implemented. But certainly the trajectories are unmistakable.
Thank you, Robert.
Thank you very much.